Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the second lecture for the land contracts block. Now, tonight's festivities. I've got some revision questions. Most of our sessions will usually, particularly when we're looking at knowledge and substance like knowledge, we'll have revision sessions right at the beginning. And so consequently the first part of tonight's lecture is some questions which I want you to do in relation to last week's festivities. And the questions basically say answering the following true or false questions and cite sections of relevant legislation where relevant, and they're true and false. So I'm going to get you to do that first off. Distance students, before you listen to this recording, I want you to have a go at these sections and do the questions just as the students in class would do. No jumping ahead, just looking at the listening to the recording. So you won't get anything out of it if you do that. And so I'm going to pause the recording shortly. And then tonight we're going to look at the Australian Institute of Conveyancers contract for the sale of land. And I'm going to go through the contract with you and take a few and point you out to a few parts of the contract, particularly the schedule, which we'll look at, because the schedule is what essentially you'll be filling out later in the course. And I will also have a look at the actual terms in the contract, but I'll be a bit more, more specific. I won't go through every clause in the contract, because that has one guarantee if I do that. And if I go through every clause in the contract, what do you think I can guarantee will happen?
You'll forget.
Not only will you forget, you'll probably fall asleep. Thank you. Okay? So we'll go through that, and I'll try and be as targeted as possible on some of the key areas. But over time, you'll get a bit more used to the contracts, and that's the key, really. We'll focus more on the schedule tonight, which is what you actually fill out. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause the recording, and if you could have a go at these questions, that will be great. Please make sure you refer to your notes, the materials we looked at last week, and you should find the answers for nearly all of the questions in there. And remember, it's short answers, so and cite your answers as well. Okay. Okay, we'll just do the first three questions. So the first one we've got. To become a registered conveyancer, I only need to have the Cert 4 in conveyancing. Must be true, mustn't it?
You don't do it anymore.
No? No? Is it? What, you all got false, have you?
Yeah.
Are you confident about that?
Yeah.
Well, I'm impressed. Okay, so what section of the Act refers to?
Section 7.
Section 7.1, I heard?
Yes.
Yep. And Section 7.1A1, and it just says, has the qualifications required by regulations. Okay. And what page of the notes did you find that on? Page 23. Good. Page 23. Now, so you're quite right. The Cert 4 was an old qualification. And even when the Cert 4 existed, it still needed additional units. So to be registered, what do we need? The Advanced Diploma of Conveyancing, which we currently deliver. Yeah. Okay.
Did they say that? Is that got any
no, it's not in there. No, it's not in there. You have to look at the regulations. And if you go on to the Consumer Business Services side, you'll actually be able to see the full list going back for the last 20, 30 years. You'll see them all there.
Okay.
And the last one is basically this qualification.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Okay, next one we've got. Only a natural person is entitled to be registered as a conveyancer. True or false?
False.
What have you got? True? False? False? How many saying false? How many saying true?
True.
And the answer is false. Why?
Because under section 7(2) and 3, companies entitled to be registered as conveyancers.
Okay, good. Section 7(2) of which Act again? My memory is terrible.
The
Conveyancers Act. Fantastic. So you've said a company is entitled to be registered as a conveyancer. And what page of the notes was that one on?
24.
24. Fantastic. Third one we're going to do now. A conveyancer must deposit monies received as soon as practical into the trust account. Oh, it must be false, mustn't it?
True.
Are you sure it's true?
Yes. Well, depends on what amount.
Okay. So we've got true.
True.
Yeah. Okay. Now we've got to back yourself up now, guys.
Yeah. Section 51.
Section 15.1, I hear, of what act again? The Property Act? Conveyancers Act, that's right. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, good. All right, I'll give you a bit more time and then we'll go through the others. But I think you get the gist of it now a little bit better. Okay, now we've got question D. We've got disciplinary action against a conveyancer can be brought if the conveyancer acted negligently.
Yes, that's true.
You're saying true?
Yes.
You confident on that?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm impressed. Now, do we have something to back us up on that? Section 45(1)(c). Do I hear? Everybody got that?
Page 23.
Page 28. Fantastic. Okay. Now, the next one we've got. E. Following a court hearing, a complaint against a conveyancer, a fine of $10,000 may be ordered. Okay. Who's got false for this?
Yeah.
False.
Yes.
Who's got true? True. False? Oh. And the answer is true. Now, so let's spread the love here. What section tells us this?
49B.
49(1)(b). Which act again? The Property Act? Or the Conveyancers Act? Okay, I'm glad you corrected me there. And what does the wording actually say?
It says no more than 20,000. So because 10,000 is within 20,000, still can be fined for that
Okay.
amount.
So the wording says not exceeding 20,000. Okay. So, and this is the trick. You know, you've got to be very literal with the legislation and read the questions very carefully. Okay. And in our notes, what did we have for that? What page was that on? What page? 29. Thank you. Okay, 29. Now, next one we've got. Number G. Cooling off rights apply at auction.
False.
False? I'm getting false. Are you sure?
Yes.
You are sure?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. What are you backing me up? What are you going to back yourself up on with there? Section 5(7) of what act was that again? Conveyancers, was it?
Land and Business Sale and Conveyancing Act.
What was that again?
Land and Business.
Land and Business Sale and Conveyancing Act. Okay, so calling off rights don't apply at auction, do they? So you're quite right, it's false. And in our notes, what page was that? 12. Fantastic. Okay, next one. For the purchase of residential real estate, cooling off rights of 4 days apply. False. You sure?
Yeah.
And the answer is false. Now, how do we get to the false?
Section 5(8).
Oh, section 5(8)(a) of which act?
Land and Business Sales and Conveyancing Act.
Is that right? Is that the right act?
I think so.
Land and Business Sale and Conveyancing Act. And what does that section tell us?
As for 2 days.
What's the actual wording used?
It's just under the contract for the sale of land may be given the vendor written notice before the time prescribed.
Time prescribed. And the time prescribed is then defined as... Well, you gave me the section, so what does the section say?
Intention not to be bound by the contract, rescind the contract.
Okay,
For
but
example, purchaser can end the contract or call off within a certain time.
Okay, but we're after the prescribed time. You've mentioned it, and you've given me a section. So what was the section you gave me again?
5A.
8. Yeah.
Provides prescribed time.
And the prescribed time. And
Page 14.
the prescribed time is defined, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. And that prescribed time is, what does it state?
It's 5 clear business day.
Yes, end of the second clear day.
End of the second clear business day, isn't it?
2 days.
Yes, right, yeah.
Okay. So in our notes, we found that on what page?
14.
Page 14. Okay.
Yeah, I use a different point.
Okay. Now, number I we've got. The maximum amount of money that can be taken before the calling off period expires is $1,000. That's true, isn't it?
No.
False, I'm hearing. Are you sure?
Yeah.
Well, if it's not $1,000, then what is it?
100 is the most.
100.
Yeah.
And can you back yourself up with that?
Yeah.
Let's spread the love, some of the quiet ones. What section?
16.
5,
5, 4.
subsection 5.
Section 5, subsection 5, what act?
Subsection
And
4.
business,
No.
Go on, I can't hear you. My ear hearing's going a little bit. What was that?
land and business.
Land and Business Sale and Conveyancing Act, section 5.5, doesn't it? Okay, and you'll also see 5.4 is also relevant in relation to that. Okay, on what page of our notes was that remarkable question answer found?
12.
Page 12, fantastic. Okay, next one we've got. Robbie Racer has just received a motor vehicle speeding fine of $500. He is really worried that this will prevent him from registering as a conveyancer, as his friend Octavia says it will. Is that true?
Oh,
I'm hearing false. So, okay, you're telling me false. What else are you going to tell me? What, you're going to back that up?
Section 7.
Section 7?
1.
1?
Another 1
And then it's the A, B, it lists the.
sorry.
Section 7, 1B, I hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I still need more from you guys. Section 7, 1B. I've heard. Hold on. Okay, you hold that thought just a moment. You've told me section 7, 1B. Fantastic.
Yes.
But I still need more. No? You've told me section 7, 1B.
It's not a dishonesty offence. I mean, it's an offence, but it's not a dishonesty offence. One spending fine.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Conveyancers Act.
Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry.
All right, okay. And this is what I'm trying to get you into the habit of. Okay, when you're going to, you know the answer, and I can see you knowing the answers, but I need you to back yourself up. Section, Act. Okay. Next one. Just going on again. So before we move on to that one, you've given me section 7.1b. So yep. Notes page is what?
23 and going on to
24.
Yeah.
Okay. And so why was that false?
It wasn't dishonest.
It wasn't an.
a dishonesty charge or offence.
Good. Okay, so it wasn't an indictable offence of dishonesty, nor a summary offence of dishonesty. Okay. Why do you think that's important? Before we move on, why was this whole dishonesty thing important again? Why is they making a big deal about this? If you've got a dishonesty offence, you may not be able to be registered. Why?
Because you're handling trust monies and millions of dollars potentially.
Thank you, because you're handling trust monies. Good.
Yeah,
Last one.
Yes, I've got a question regarding this one. Is like it doesn't say if you are disqualified or be disciplined by other professional body, but you're not come to the level of be penalized by the law. You still can register as a conveyancer. Is it amazing, right? For example, if you are practice as a nurse, and then you will be disciplined by the AFRA, and then you said that you are not a person of integrity, but still fine, because I'm not punished by law. Is that right?
I'm sorry, I missed.
We're trying to talk about C.
Yeah.
7.1c, where they're talking about if you're is not suspended or disqualified from practicing or carrying on an occupation.
Is that so?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So that's
Yes.
one of the other.
That's one of the other criteria. And
Yeah.
so you're not disqualified from practicing. And
Okay.
it's cumulative
Okay.
with those. Okay. Next one we've got K. The purchaser of land must be served with the Form 1 at least 5 clear business days before the settlement date.
True.
False. Okay, so if you're going to say it's false, what section are you going to back yourself up with?
Section 9, subsection 2 of the conveyances.
No, section 7 of the law. Is it the law? Oh my God.
Section 7
Yeah.
of what act?
Of the LBC.
Land and Business Sale and Conveyancing Act. So what does section 7 enlighten us with?
It says, requires a vendor at least 10 clear business days, 10 clear days prior to settlement.
Okay, good. So that backs up why that is false. Okay, so it has to be 10.
And it's on page 5.
Page 5. Thank you. Okay. All right, good. Okay, well, look, that little exercise was useful because I just wanted to get you into the habit of backing yourself up with referencing the sections of the Act. And in your assignment, you'll find a number of questions where there may only be a sentence or 2 sentences that you've got to answer, but you need to back yourself up with referring to the relevant sentence.
So the last question, what section of the Land and Business Act?
Section 7.1.
Section 7, page 5.
What's the 10
Land and Business Sales and Conveyancing Act.
Now, you'll also notice on that little exercise, I also moved the goalposts from you because the question only asked you to cite the relevant sections of the legislation, but I wanted you to give me the page numbers as well. And that was purely... Yep, that's right. And that was just purely so that you've got a reference to your notes. If you need to check later, you can find out where you've got the answers.
Oh, righty-o.
Okay.
Yeah, I was looking at section 9, subsection 2, which kind of says the same thing. All right. Yeah.
It says that if you put a deposit on the property of more than $100, so you put $1,000 down, it means that the real estate agent has asked you for it, which is they're not supposed to do, correct?
No. But we need to make a distinction here, and we'll come back to that because we're going to be looking at that shortly. All right, okay. So tonight we're going to be looking at the contract for the sale and purchase of land. We're going to look at the AXA version of the contract, and I'm going to concentrate. You'll see we've got, just looking at the contract here. We've got the first page. We've got some warnings and a few matters raised there. We've also then got a nice table of contents, which enables us to actually go through the contracts and find fairly quickly various terms of the contract which are going to be relevant to the transaction. And then we're going to look at, we've got the schedule of particulars, okay? And the schedule of particulars, importantly, is what we're probably going to focus on more tonight as I go through it with you. Because when you actually have to fill the contract out, this is the main section which you're actually going to be physically need to actually fill out. All right? Simple as that. And then we'll have a look at a few of the terms in the contract afterwards if you're still awake on me. Okay. Now we're on just under 20 minutes now, so Julie, I need you to, no pressure, I need you to remind me. Okay, so the first thing we're going to go through the schedule, and we've got the schedule of particulars. So we're looking at item 1 first, okay? And we've got the vendor, okay, item 1. So when we fill this out, we want to make sure that the name is the same as on the certificate of title, okay? And it's always very useful at the very early stages if the the vendor can supply you with or show you their rates notice or something like that, so that you can confirm that even before you do a title search that they are the vendors. What you don't want is you don't want, a vendor coming in initially and saying, oh, yes, I want to sell my property, rah, 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 and you that later discover when you do your search a week or two later that, or 2 days later, whenever you actually do it, that they're on the title with their wife or their husband, and there's acrimony between them, and etc., etc. So it's usually quite useful to see a copy of their rates notice when they in relation to that before you even check the title. So it's just a practical way of finding that. And the next one we've got is the purchaser. Okay, and clearly, the full names and addresses of the purchasers. If it's a company, then we're going to have the ACN number. And normally we'd have, if a child is there, we'd have a joint purchase with an adult if there's a child involved, which makes it clearly a lot more easier to enforce. Item number 3, we've got land. Now, take your time with this section. Okay. Ordinarily, you'll be able to fill this out from looking at the certificate of title that you've got. And importantly, you've got lot, allotment, plan number, whole or portion. So always check the title for that. But the main thing that you've got to get right is the certificate of title reference. And if you don't get that right, fail. All right? You've got to make sure you get the CT reference right, because that's the main thing.
There was a story that used recently, I can't remember if it was in SA or Interstate, about a guy who purchased a property, right? It was advertised for sale, he went to the inspection, he saw it was a rural property, right? Then, I think it was about 7 years later or something, he found out that the property he bought, that he went to the inspection for, was not the property that he moved into. The certificate of title that he held, that he purchased, was to an unimproved lot up the road, and I think it was earmarked for a highway to go through or something.
Right.
And the property that he bought was owned, the property that he lived in, that he thought he bought, was owned by the council, and I can't remember how he found out that it was messed up. So there's this huge mess up. So obviously lots of people messed up, right? The agent showed him a property, and showed people a property that was not the property that was sold. But in order for this to happen, right, when you fill out the instruments, like you said, you've got the certificate of title reference there, that had to have been correct for the property that was meant to be sold to be transferred to him, right?
No. Okay.
But it had to have
what has clearly happened? What you're saying is that he saw the property, and he thinks that's what he's buying.
Yeah, he inspected it.
And he inspected it, and they prepared the contracts, and it was all signed, and etc., etc. And then he actually moves into the property, thinking that he owns that property. But it turned out that the actual contract gave a different CT from the one that he actually had purchased, which must be what you're telling me.
It must have been the other way around, though, because in order for the property up the hill, to be transferred to him, the property that should have, the property that it was transferred, he actually owned the property up on the hill. It had to have the certificate of title for that property. But it must have had the address of the property that he moved in.
Yeah.
So the certificate of title must have been right, but the address wrong. Right?
Yeah.
So
but coming back to this, okay, we can go into the specifics in whatever, but at the end of the day, he thinks he's buying Block A, and he moves into Block A, but later on it's discovered the paperwork says he's bought Block B.
Yeah. So we've got a question. So the question is, when the instruments get to the land titles office, obviously lots of people messed up here, but when the instruments get to the land titles office, don't they have a responsibility to check that certificate of title matches the address of that certificate of title on their records?
Okay.
Isn't that their job?
Okay, that's coming back. That's coming back to the role of the examiner. But that is a basic mistake which should have been picked up even earlier.
Yeah, I understand all that. Lots of people messed up at the time.
So when you can raise this with Peter next semester because he deals with lands titles. But the principle here is that clearly there's a lot of mistakes, negligence has been committed
by a lot of people.
I'm just wondering
they also have some responsibility because they're the guardian of the records.
Yeah.
They're the protector that, under the trust title, that this thing doesn't happen.
Okay. Well, before you even get to that stage, you've got to ask yourself the question. Okay. Who is at fault?
Lots of people.
Lots of people.
Lots
Okay.
of people.
So, essentially, if you're my conveyancer, I'm going to be expecting that you're going to check this to make sure that I'm buying what I say I'm buying.
Yeah,
okay?
I understand all that.
I could be taking an action against you. Meanwhile, the agent who's actually selling the land, where's the information come from? It looks like they've made a mistake and they've been negligent. So, at the end of the day, there's going to be a number of actions for negligence. But also contract law comes into this. And I think if you did contract law with me last semester, I talked about a case which is not, it's not the same as this, but it was an old High Court case 60 years ago now. It's called Svancia against McNamara, where what happened in that case was that a purchaser believed he was buying the hotel which sat on the block. Now, when he actually did buy the hotel, he discovered, a few months afterwards, that the hotel didn't sit within the boundary.
Ooh.
So half of the hotel was in the block that he purchased, and the other half of the hotel was actually on the neighbour's property. Okay. Now, the High Court in that case said that he tried to get out of the contract on the grounds of mistake, and the court wouldn't allow him to get out of the contract on the grounds of mistake because there was in the absence of fraud, it wasn't. Basically, he should have done his own searches and inquiries. That's what the High Court said. But in this example you're giving me, there's a multiple negligence factor here with regard to, a number of people haven't provided the duty of care that you would expect.
Yeah, I understand all that, and so the agent has made a big mistake, and lots of people made big mistakes. I'm just wondering if how the land titles office allowed that to go through. I would have thought they would have a responsibility to be the
maybe they do, maybe they don't. But you've got to look at the standard expected of them. They're dealing with hundreds of transfers that are going through. Are you going to if the CTs are correct, and in all intents and purposes, there's nothing wrong, are they going to be checking the actual street address against that? I don't know. You have to. In fact, you'd ask Peter.
Realistically, they just deal with the CT.
CT.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's not the address.
Yeah.
It's not their note. Yeah.
I can't.
That's why you have so many people prior.
The primary you'd expect on your. Yeah. At the end of the day.
When I bought my place,
Yep.
the agent, when he done the contract, had it already signed, sealed, whatever, sent it off to the bank manager. He actually picked up the error.
Yeah.
There was an error in it, and he picked it up.
The bank manager.
The bank manager did.
Yeah. So, and this is it, this is the point being is that's why, when we're filling out documents and searching titles, you've got to be very careful.
What was the name of the case? Was something versus McNamara?
It's a case called Svancia against McNamara.
How do you spell the first thing?
SV
Yeah.
ANS
Yeah.
IO against McNamara, 1956, High Court of Australia. I think it's 56, something like that. Okay, now let's get back to the contract.
Yes.
So now we've got, we need to make sure we get the certificate of title right on item 3, and that very colourful example is another reason why we need to make sure that happens. That's very, very rare that mistakes like that are made, but unfortunately, occasionally they do. Now, number 4 we've got included goods. Now, number 4 and 5 are, we'll talk about both of them individually in a moment, but number 4 and 5, excluded items, what you need to also be aware of with items 4, and probably don't write this on the contract itself, so I'm actually going to get you to fill out this contract next week. I'm going to get to use this contract, so either write in the margins or on a separate piece of paper. So, item number 4 and 5. Now, this comes down to a concept in property law with regard to fixtures and fittings. And the key thing to also consider in items 4 and 5 is essentially what I've always said to real estate agents is when they're before they've even had an open inspection, is to really say to the vendor, is there anything affixed to the property that you're actually intending to take. All right? And if there is, okay, and it's fixed to the property, you want to make sure that it's listed in item 5, which is an excluded chattel, because if it's deemed to be a fixture, it will essentially be deemed to go with the land. And so then there'll be an unhappy purchaser later who moves into the property and discovers, whatever it may be, that something that's fixed onto the property has been removed. Okay, and so in item 4, we'd normally, detail things which are going to be included, like dishwashers, window treatments, light fittings, fixed floor coverings, anything, for example, goods which are going to stay with the property. Item 5 is the one that is a bit of item 4. Excluded items on item 5, generally is going to be vendor's personal effects, and any item that could be a fixture that the vendor is intending to take. Okay, so if there's anything they're intending to take, then item 5 we want to exclude it.
So is that like, for example, Bill, you've got an old mirror that was your grandmother's and you've got it on the wall, next to the wall, and you're saying, well, that's not going to be included, even though it's a fixture, I'm taking that with
That's
me.
right.
So you've got the right to put that in the contract and
yes.
agree to it. So you've got to do that beforehand, otherwise it's...
Exactly, and that's a good example you've given me, because there could be a very nice mirror, and it's fixed, it's screwed in, and it makes the hallway look brilliant. The purchaser who who goes to the open inspection sees the mirror and says, "Oh, that mirror's lovely. Oh, it's fixed into the property," and they're expecting it. And so, if you don't put it as an excluded chattel, it could be deemed to be a fixture. And so, when the settlement occurs, they're expecting to get that mirror, and they don't. And then they're going to, if you haven't put it as an excluded chattel, your client's going to be very unhappy.
So in those circumstances, if you're going to remove it, it's obviously expected that you will fix any damage.
Make good any damage. Yes,
damage.
That's right. Yeah.
You don't have to include that in the contract. You just
normally you'd have that in the contract.
Sorry?
You would have it that the vendor would make make good the damage. Yeah, okay. And I think in this contract there is a clause which actually says that later on. Okay. I can give you a very good example. Many years ago, my mother she was selling her property and she had a lovely chandelier.
Oh yes.
In the entrance hall. And so basically in the excluded chattel had to put in there, that essentially that the chandelier was an excluded item which would be taken by the vendor and would be replaced by a different light fitting.
And it wasn't up to the purchaser to choose, it was whatever you want to replace it with.
That could have been negotiable. That could have been negotiable, yeah. The key thing that it's upfront and it's clear. You see,
otherwise, say too bad it was in the contract. It stays.
If it's fixtured, it's exactly, and it doesn't look very good afterwards. No, in that situation, exactly. The ironic thing on that little story I told you about the chandelier was that she had the chandelier removed and tried to put it into a new place, and the electrician said, "No, it's not. There's wiring and etc. And so she couldn't actually put it up. But in reality, it was probably a good thing because. She didn't know anything about the wiring to it, but if there'd been a problem, obviously, it could have been issues later.
So, sorry, a pot plant's outside, is that considered a fixture?
No. Normally, no. Because normally, look, they have two tests in property law. They have what's called the degree of annexation test and the object of annexation test. And it's very, what's the word? A lot of the case law, it doesn't really help, but I think the High Court has indicated that the object of annexation test is the main one, which looks what was the intention of the parties when they put it there. It's very difficult to ascertain that.
Bill, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the best yardstick is to say, look, use common sense and say, look, if the item is, fixed really heavily to the property and it's going to cause damage if it's going to be removed, then it's very more likely to be a fixture. Yeah. If it's a freestanding item, like you're saying, like a pot plant, then you'd normally class that as something which would be taken by the vendor. Yeah.
Charles mentioned that last term. He said that it was a really large, heavy pot plant that a person would normally expect it to stay just because it's so big and heavy, you might want to put it in the contract that you take it with you. Because like my mum's got huge, big heavy pot plants, and she loves her plants, and she'd probably take her big ones with her when she goes.
Yeah.
I've urns I have with it, like fish ponds and stuff like that. Is that?
Well, this is the issue, and you see, the problem is we don't want to get into the law's determination of what a fixture or a fitting is, because we only have to go to that if we stuff up on the contract. Yeah, sure. So that's why it becomes really imperative, to detail it. So anything of any danger, you make sure you put it in. I've got this table at home, and it's a lovely table. And I'm not joking, it weighs a ton. Yes. And the guys, when I bought it and they delivered it and they brought it in, and they thought I was going to put it up myself. And I said, "You're having a laugh, mate." I said to him, I expected this to be actually assembled. And it took 3 of them to actually lift the thing and put it in. But if I ever sell the house, the table's staying, because there's no way, it weighs a ton. There's no way that I want to actually remove that. So if I sell the house, I'm going to put it as a tactic. I'm going to look as a fantastic vendor. Because the table's very impressive where it is. It's going to be that's going to be included in the sale. That's a bargain. And that type of thing. But in reality, I don't want it, because I don't want the hassle of trying to dismantle it and getting 3 blokes in to help me pull the thing out. Anyway. We move on. Okay, next one we've got. So item 4 and 5, so in item 4, we're going to include things like dishwashers, window treatments, that type of thing. In item 5, we'd normally state things like the vendor's personal effects and anything which, is fixed to the property, which the vendor is intending to take with them. Okay, all right. Now, item number 6, we've got encumbrances. So in here, we're going to include any exceptions, reservations, encumbrances, etc., etc. Okay, what does this mean in simple language? Well, the good thing about this contract, you'll see it actually does refer you to different clauses in the contract, so you can actually read, the items linked to clauses in the contract. But essentially, items we're going to put in here are going to be anything in the future which the purchaser should be aware of that they might be bound by. So, for example, we'll look at the definition, okay? But the best examples are things like strata titles. You buy into a strata title, and you're subject to the strata title rules. So you'd use that as an exception. So you detail the articles of the strata corporation. If anybody's got a restrictive covenant on the property, do you understand what a restrictive covenant is? No? Okay. So this is an interest which is usually placed onto the land within an encumbrance, which prevents the vendor from doing certain things on the land. So, for example, there could be an encumbrance on the land that says you cannot subdivide the land, okay, and things like that. All right. So, anybody's got an interest in the property there, which is going to continue after settlement, then we'd want to make sure it's there. And you take your time and read 3.1b, and you can actually see that. Now, item 7, you'll see tenancies. You detail that if that was relevant. Now, item 8, we've got the settlement date.
Sorry, tenancies means if it's already rented.
Yes, if it's got, detail the details of the tenancy if there's a tenancy there. Okay. Now, item 8. Okay, now, item 8 is the settlement date. Now, the key thing here is we want to have a realistic date for settlement. Okay, a realistic date for settlement. And the best approach when considering what the settlement date is going to be, okay, the first thing that I would be telling you guys to do, all right, is straight away, let's go to the execution. The settlement date can't be read on its own. Okay, go to the page 8 of the contract. So before you decide what the settlement date is going to be, okay, on page 8 of the contract, at the top of the page, we've got the words what?
Date of this contract.
Date of this contract. So well, before we make a settlement date there, we want to make sure we know what the date of the contract is. Okay. Also, if you look at item 13 in the contract, we've got conditions of sale, and we'll look at that shortly. But we also need to know if there are special conditions in the contract, what those special conditions are. So before we set a settlement date, we've got to, one, think about what the date of our contract is, and secondly, if there are any special conditions and the requirements of those special conditions. So when we set the settlement date, we've got to put a realistic date. And we'd work from item 13 in relation to that. And, we might have things... I personally prefer to have a set date to work to. Some people, if it's not very clear, might, suggest within 21 days is quite common practice after the date on which the last of the conditions set out and such have been met. Personally, I prefer to have a set date to work to. Oh, thank you. No, we've got 5 minutes. Thank you, Handicap. Okay, now, at the bottom of each page, we'd get the parties to initial the contract. Okay, item 9, we've got the purchase price. Okay. Now, I always suggest that the purchase price should be in words and figures, okay, to ensure that there isn't a mistake. And sometimes mistakes can be made. I mean, sometimes we have different cultures who have a different comma here and there, which can cause problems. So always put it in words and figures. And I think if you did contract with me last semester, remember I referred you guys to that case about the lady who signed the contract when she believed she was selling 10 acres of land at $15,000 an acre, but the contract, instead of it, which should have meant that the contract price should have been $150,000, but what the contract price was actually $15,000. Remember we talked about that case, okay? And that could have been that problem could have been solved if it had been put in words and figures right at the beginning when if it had been put in words and figures right at the beginning in the option in that case. Jim, I'm having a brain problem. I can't remember the name of the case. That's a concern. It will come back to me. Okay. Now, importantly here, so we want words and figures. And GST amount, normally if it's residential land, it wouldn't normally include GST unless it's a new build. So normal residential property we wouldn't need to worry about GST there. But what we do need to concern ourselves here is that the changes in the law relating to capital gains withholding. Now, this used to be very simple up to a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, but now what happens is that if the property is over $750,000, okay, if it's over $750,000, okay, then there is a capital gains withholding procedure which we have to follow, which is aimed at foreign nationals, but residential vendors will need to get what's called a clearance certificate from the Australian Taxation Office as soon as possible. Okay, so I'm just going to give you something just for a moment. Hold on. Let's pause this.